Hello, I'm Michael Millum, pastor of Amazing Grace Lutheran Church in Lawrenceville, Georgia, and I hope you are blessed by the hearing and preaching of God's Word today.
Has it ever occurred to you that it might not be such a great idea to invite Jesus to one of your dinner parties? Of course, this happens quite often in the Gospels. As we said, Jesus is always being invited into somebody's home for a meal. But when Jesus attends someone's meal in their home, he almost always does something outrageous that violates the social etiquette and norms of his day and winds up offending just about everyone at the party. And today's gospel reading is no exception. Jesus has been invited into the home of a Pharisee, and we're told right away that this is the Sabbath day, so we know from that there's a clue that something is going to happen that's probably not quite kosher. And indeed, in verses 2 through 7, or 2 through 6 actually, that are excerpted from the reading that we had from the gospel today, Jesus encounters a man who has a condition known as dropsy. And on the Sabbath, once again, he heals that man. But in this particular case, it's not just a violation of a technicality in the Sabbath law, as with the reading that we had last week. It's also a violation of good taste, because Jesus upstages his host, and he makes everybody else at the party uncomfortable. And then Jesus goes on to insult just about everybody present at this dinner party. He notices how the guests are jockeying for a position at the table. They're vying for the places of honor at the table, which would have been the places that are closest to the head of the table, where the host would usually sit. And of course, all these folks are doing is abiding by the social etiquette of their day. But then Jesus gives them a lesson in what I have called kingdom etiquette. He tells those who are present at the party not to do that, because you might run into a situation where you take a place of honor at the table, and then someone with a higher VIP status than you have might show up fashionably late, as we like to do at social occasions of this kind, and then the host would have to come to you and tell you to surrender your chair to this person who has a more elite standing than you do. And then you would be humiliated and embarrassed when you were forced to take a lower place at the table. Now, I find it interesting that we do almost the opposite in the church, don't we? I take it for granted that the best seats in the house of the Lord are those that are up front, nearest the altar, where the action is, where visibility and hearing is its best. But when most of us come into the church, we fill in the back chairs first, and we don't ever quite seem to make it forward to the places of honor up front here. So I want to see if I can rectify that this morning. Now, Nanette, you are certainly a VIP member of this congregation. You've been here a long time, but you always grab the seats in the back row, and you like to sit back here with your cronies. I want to be a gracious host and offer you a place up front. So would you come and join us up front? These seats up front are, and your friends can join you. Come on down, folks. Come on down. Okay, these seats are not just reserved for the worship assistant and the pastor's wife and the pastor. As a VIP member of our congregation, you're certainly welcome in the place of honor up front. And of course, now that you're sitting towards the front, there will be no excuses for falling asleep in the worship service. Next, then, Jesus goes after the host again. And he tells the host of the party that when he hosts a dinner banquet, that he should not simply invite his friends and his neighbors, the elite of the community who are going to make his gathering look good merely by their presence. Jesus tells him that he should invite the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. In other words, the outcasts and the people who are on the margins of society. Invite them instead, because they can't pay you back by extending an invitation to you for a dinner party that they will likely never hold. You should invite those who are on the margins of society. I think that in our fast-paced, fast food culture in which we live, that we have lost touch with how sacred it is to sit down at a table and break bread with other folks. It really is an intimate activity when you consider, because of course you don't go around inviting strangers into your home for a meal, do you? You're very careful about the people you choose to sit down at a table with. And at school, in the cafeteria, you don't sit down at the table with the losers, with the social misfits and outsiders. You sit down with, well, you're probably the only school person here this morning, so you sit down mostly with your friends and the people that you know well, because you know that your peers are judging you by the company you keep. You see, none of that mattered to Jesus. He not only taught social or kingdom etiquette to people, he exemplified it. As we know from the Gospels, he very often sat down at a table with those who were outcast, on the outside of society. Sinners of all description, tax collectors, prostitutes, harlots, lepers, people who were shunned. He very often shared table fellowship with those folks to extend God's welcome and God's hospitality. And he was judged harshly for that. Now let me ask you this. Who is it that you would have a hard time welcoming into our community of faith here at Amazing Grace? And who would you be reluctant to share supper at the Lord's table with? And I see somebody shaking their head. Wait a minute, this is Amazing Grace. We welcome everybody here. And of course, that is our sense of identity, that we are warm and hospitable, that everyone is welcome. And I'm sure that probably is the reception that you received the first time you came into this congregation. You might have been invited here by a friend, or if you came through those doors of your own volition, chances are somebody from the hospitality committee was right there to greet you, to show you where the coffee pot is and all the goodies for fellowship time after the service, to hand you a bulletin, give you a plate of cookies, and welcome you, perhaps invite you to come on Tuesday morning and play pool with the guys, and make you feel right at home. But I have a feeling not everyone across the years has received that same reception, even here at Amazing Grace. I've been in the church a long time, folks. I know what it's like. In the city of Torrington, Connecticut, where my former congregation was located, we had a number of people in the community with mental health issues. And of course, there were quite a few mental health agencies that were around as well to try and meet some of those needs. And occasionally, some of the folks from that community would find their way into our congregation for a worship service. And I can tell you that they were not greeted the same as most people were, because it was very obvious they had some special needs. They were socially backward in some ways, and it made people uncomfortable to be around them. And in spite of that fact, some of those folks would keep coming for months at a time to worship with us, even though they were never really welcomed. One gentleman I can remember, named Steve, actually joined the choir for a period of time and sang along with everybody else, but never received the welcome and patience from our choir director and the other members of the choir, who found his personality quirks a little bit difficult to deal with and made them uncomfortable. I used to hear people talk about the cologne he wore and how they didn't like it and things like that. And eventually, Steve got the idea and quit coming. And I have to confess that I, as the pastor, did not insist in the way that I should have that he and other folks with special needs were welcomed in the way that Jesus would have demanded that we do. So chances are there's somebody out there that you would be rather uncomfortable with, sharing space in our worship or at the Lord's table. People that you might not consider to be fully worthy of the invitation to come to the Lord's table. And that's the question that gets raised in today's gospel reading. Who is worthy? Is it our friends? The people who look and sound like we do? Who is worthy of the invitation? And the answer to that question, folks, is that none of us are worthy. We all come forward at the time when we celebrate the Lord's Supper as beggars with our hands outstretched for a morsel of bread and a little bit of wine. None of us is worthy. And because none of us is worthy to come to the Lord's table, that means no one is excluded either. Indeed, the hospitality of God's grace is extended to all, and all are welcomed to come. The message of our gospel reading this morning goes hand in hand with what our second reading from Hebrews says to us. That passage is about extending God's hospitality, especially to strangers. And it can't be lost on any of us here that within a matter of a couple of weeks, we are going to be welcoming the former members of Sagrada Familia into our congregation here at Amazing Grace. And in order to be able to extend that hospitality to them, there are going to be adjustments that are going to be made, have to be made, by those of us who've been around here for a long time. And we may not be all that keen on some of those changes or some of those adjustments that will need to be made. But my hope is that the urgency of the New Testament, which says we are to put the needs of our brothers and sisters in Christ above our own, and especially the needs of the church and its mission above our own preferences. Hopefully, that message will prevail among us, and we will be able to welcome those folks in and fully become one family with one another. And if you find the prospect of a changing worship schedule on Sunday morning or Sunday school or whatever it is, I'm certain we haven't encountered all of the changes that may need to be made in order for this to work out. We haven't anticipated everything. If you're going to find some of that to be difficult, let me ask you for a moment to put yourself in the place of those folks who are going to be leaving behind a congregation in which they have worshiped for years, a community that they have come to know and love. And they will be moving out here to Amazing Grace, which is a strange space to them. And they will have to try to fit in with this congregation of people who already knows one another and loves one another well in this place. So whatever changes or adjustments we are going to be called upon to make here is nothing compared to the changes that are coming for those folks. And perhaps if we can think of it that way, we will find the empathy that we need to extend the hospitality to the folks from Sagrada Familia and fully welcome them into our family of faith here at Amazing Grace. When you look around this congregation, there's a fair amount of diversity that you see. And this is something that I've always loved about this congregation from the moment I got here. And it's something that we truly should celebrate because we have succeeded in doing something that probably less than 2% of all congregations have been able to do. Bring people together across a wide diversity of ethnicity and race and even language in this congregation. We have 2 primary languages that are spoken here. But for all the progress that we have made, I have noticed that when we have a social gathering here at Amazing Grace or even an activity like homework help on Wednesday nights where food is served, generally speaking, the English speaking folks from our congregation congregate around tables together, while the Spanish-speaking families generally find their own tables someplace else, and they stay to themselves as well. And there's no mystery as to why this is the case. There's a language barrier, obviously, and that makes people very uncomfortable. However, if we are truly to become one family of faith, particularly as the folks from Sagrada Familia also come to become part of our body here at Amazing Grace, someone is going to have to take the step and cross that boundary. And even if we don't speak the same language, we're going to have to find a way to communicate with one another if we are truly to be one and extend the hospitality that Christ would have us extend to all people. Now, I'm guessing that some of us probably are not all that keen on this whole kingdom etiquette idea, because it goes against the grain of everything that we've been taught all of our lives and the way that we conduct ourselves on a regular basis. Jesus comes into our midst on Sunday morning as an invited guest. That's the way we begin our worship every time we meet. We invite Jesus, we invoke his presence. And then during the course of our service on Sunday morning, as we come to our celebration of the sacrament of Holy Communion, then Jesus takes over as the host of the meal. And arguably, that's what happens in today's gospel reading as well. Jesus starts out as a guest like everybody else who is in attendance. And then when he begins to school the other guests on kingdom etiquette, he effectively takes over as the host. Jesus is not only the host of this meal, but he is the meal. Talk about multitasking. And we are all invited. We have received our invitation to the Lord's table by the hospitality of his grace alone. That's the only reason that any of us is here. And so this kingdom etiquette, folks, works in our favor as well. It truly is good news for all.